I'm joined by Wissam Tarif for the first time by Skype. Wissam, give us the latest on what's happening in Syria.
Well, the crackdown continues in Syria, and the wave of arbitrary detention continues in the country. And there is a higher focus on human rights activists and on people who are getting engaged in the protests. More worrying, I think, and what is urgent at the moment, we know that three Syrian soldiers have fled to Lebanon. The Lebanese military intelligence has detained those soldiers and they run the risk to be deported back to Syria. We have to keep in mind that Lebanon and Syria has security accordances in which, and according to that, they can be deported to Syria. I think the international community, the United Nations, the UNHCR, and Amnesty and the Human Rights Watch should step in immediately. If those soldiers were deported to Syria, then there is a serious risk of torture and perhaps execution.
Does them going point to wider dissent within the army?
Well, in this particular incident, what we know that refugees, Syrian refugees, or people who were fleeing Syria on the northern Lebanese border with Syria were being shot by the Shabiha. There was a military checkpoint near the border which seems to have engaged in crossfire with the Shabiha. The four soldiers were crossed to Lebanon. One has died, one is injured and is in the hospital, and two are in custody. That soldier who is in hospital as well is in custody. I think we are seeing a wider crackdown or a wider defection in the Syrian army at inscripts level, which means people who are on obligatory military service. We haven't seen defection so far at a high level or something which organized to be able to talk about uh, an army which is getting divided. I think we are talking at a smaller scale so far. Nevertheless, if those soldiers, when they defect to a country such as Lebanon, and if they are deported back, then we are sending totally the wrong message to their fellow soldiers who do not want to kill innocent life, and they want simply to become citizens and to do the correct thing, and that is not shooting the civilians.
Now, over the weekend, Israel accused Syria of trying to distract attention from its own political unrest by allowing people to cross over at the Golan Heights. Do you buy that theory?
Well, the Syrian regime has a long history of manipulating the regional arena for its survival and for its best interest. Any political or security development on the border with Israel at the moment, or in Lebanon, we have seen this movement not only on the Syrian border. I think the significance of seeing young people on the Syrian border has to be seen of what is happening in the whole region, not only in Syria. Definitely, the Syrian regime has tried to manipulate this to take attention of what's happening inside. Inside, the killing is still going on. The army is still in the streets. Security forces are still detaining people. We have thousands of people who are in arbitrary detention being tortured by a wide set of torture tools and methods, which reminds me of what I have read about Hafiz al-Assad era in the 1980s. I think there is a manipulation of something else which is happening in the region, and what we should note that logistically speaking, those young people or the people who were on the border with Golan Heights wouldn't be able to access the area unless the Syrian regime has allowed it.
Is there any sign that what happened yesterday has taken the momentum out of the protest movement?
I don't see why at all. I think
Are there fewer signs of protests today, for example?
I don't think the Syrian regime will be able to send a message now to the Syrian people that okay, we are fighting Israel. The Syrian regime has kept the Golan Heights and the border with Israel very quiet for the last 40 years. I haven't seen any American flags or Israeli flags being burned in Damascus or anywhere else in Syria. I think Syrian people now are focusing on internal issues. This is a domestic issue. This is not related to Israel or to Lebanon or to Palestine or anything else. This is related to basic freedoms and human rights. Those people have been oppressed for the last 48 years and living under a state of emergency law. Now people have stepped out and saying we want to live in dignity, with freedom, and we want to practice our citizenship. It is very simple. I don't think the two issues are connected. And I think it's just another game and manipulation of the regime. No, we have seen today protests in Aleppo, we have seen protests in Damascus suburb, we have seen protests in Latakia, and young people in the country are continue doing what they have been doing for the last 8 years, 8 weeks.
And what about the promise from the regime of a national dialogue? How's that going down?
Well, I think it's very difficult to call for someone for a dialogue when you have a gun on his head. The Syrian regime has deployed the army all over the country. There are tanks, there are soldiers, there are hundreds of disappeared people, thousands in arbitrary detention. Killing is going on. The army is in the street, and then the regime calls for national dialogue. What is the process? How does the regime want to do? What is the process? I think this is another maneuver of the regime. They are not serious. If they are serious about a call for national dialogue, then the process is simple. Pull the army back, stop the security forces. Legally speaking, the country is not under state emergency law, and start the process, but not before stopping the crackdown. The crackdown has to stop now. Then there is a possibility for a national dialogue, but not while the crackdown is taking place.
Okay, Wissam, good to talk to you by Skype.
Thank you, Matt.